All right, we are live. I actually enjoyed that intro stuff. It feels a little bit since it's
I want to dance now. Like I feel like I don't know if it
exactly.
was just because it's from we were doing this from Europe, but this was like 100 times better than any North American intro song that I had. I'm like,
Wow, yeah. Actually, I was sitting because that's the default video, a default countdown music for StreamYard. So I was like, should I replace this? Yes, I should, but let's go with it. It makes sense. It looks way better than nothing at all, and like it's a good opening, I would say.
I'm into it. Yeah.
Awesome. Next time you're on, I'm gonna put up some rap music just for you.
I appreciate that. Yeah. We'll also
Awesome.
get back to that.
Yeah. So really appreciate. So for those those three people who are tuning in, this is gonna be a casual fireside chat with Ross, co-founder, CEO of Accord, and we're gonna talk about B2B sales and everything in between. Really appreciate you taking time for the workshop. They really enjoyed it, the company. So really good.
Yeah. No, that was super fun. Loved how engaged everyone was. I thought we had some awesome questions, and hopefully demystifying some early stage B2B sales frameworks and ways just to kind of accelerate going to market. So yeah, it's glad to do it.
It's really good. Really good. I think that's one of the things that I'm going to jump into the questions real soon, but it's like or discussion topics, more accurate. One of the things that we live in such an engineering-oriented, technology-oriented world where you're using technology to solve problems. But most people tend to forget that, especially very product technology-driven companies, that sales is the enabler of your solution and the future of your product, because you might be able to give your products away, but sometime down the road you need to prove that it's worth paying for whatever you're doing, right?
Totally. Yeah. And especially now with the product-led growth being this big catchphrase and everything like that, it's not just hey, we're going to go to market and put out this product potentially for people to download and start using, or however your channel is for your product. It's B2B sales doesn't have to be limited to just a one-on-one conversation with your customer anymore. There's so many ways for people to learn more about your product through whether it's recorded demos, whether it's content that you're putting out. I think people need to kind of step back and think about just answering the question, how are my potential ideal customers finding out about us and getting to value initially? And it's so much beyond just that classic pitching someone and selling this big account with a larger average contract value. Yeah, so I think it's definitely broadening how people think about B2B sales today.
On the topic of that, like there's plenty of technologists out there who are looking at sales with a negative view. Why is it frowned upon in some senses?
Yeah, in some ways, I think that I think partly it is justified because of the past and how sales has been done for so many years, and even some of the activities today. Like, I don't love getting hit up by 10 people with unpersonalized emails every day because maybe we raised around or we're on some list and I have no need for the product or something like that. So I think that's, to me, that's not sales, but sales is getting a bad name because it's tied to those kind of activities. It's tied to, requesting a demo and talking to someone who has no idea about the problems that you're facing or why you reached out, and asking you, qualifying you to even talk to someone who could potentially add value. So I think there's a lot of ways that sales is set up today with these hyper specialized roles or, crazy outbound cadences that are used in the wrong way, that are continue to give sales a bad name. I think also, looking back, there was a ton of information asymmetry between what the sales rep knew in the company and what the customer knew. And I think a lot of the information was used unfairly by the selling team. And there's still best practices around, don't share the price until you've talked about the value, and all of these things that are just not great ways in my mind to approach a partnership. I think it's about being transparent, consultative, getting the right people to add value when you're actually asking for your potential customers' time. And I think we're seeing a shift based on how much easier it is and faster to go to market with technology and how many potential competitors there are, and using this go-to-market motion and sales as a competitive advantage to stand out as a company and build a real moat around that instead of just the technology itself. But yeah, there's this huge meme around, the used car salesman vibe and just like loud, character type people that are selling the thing and just trying to close the deal and don't care about the customer actually getting to value. There's definitely some things that are happening today that still lead to that. But I think to survive in the next few years, given hyper competitiveness, given the information that's out there about potential solutions, that sales teams are going to need to shift their thinking about how they're working with customers. So, yeah.
I was thinking about another topic related to that. Like, it feels like some of the engineers, because of them being so very confident in what they're building, because they have a product-oriented or technology-oriented mindset, there tend to be a gap. We discussed this during the workshop. But like, what advice could you give to sales reps who's trying to translate what the customers or potential customers is saying to the developers through the product people?
That's a great question, actually. And it's funny. It goes back to another sales technology that we're using that's super successful right now. Is Gong has been one of the most powerful tools that we've used, not for sales and for coaching and all the things that you would see on their landing page, but actually getting the voice and like literally the voice of the customer in front of the R&D team. And it's so different when you hear, even as CEO, co-founder, and ex-sales rep and leader, sharing the advice versus just that clip and the context that they have, and to be able to get that deep understanding of how it comes up and how they can use it. It's very hard. You're not going to ignore that. But it's so different when you're hearing someone say something, and maybe it's something every week, and you're trying to really conceptualize, okay, how do we build the right thing for this? It makes it so much easier when you actually have the voice of the user and you're getting that consistently to the team and democratizing that feedback loop. So that's what I would say is one of the best tools. And if you don't want to spend thousands of dollars and can't afford it because you haven't raised money yet, just record it on Zoom. Figure out another way to get the actual voice of the customer. Join more customer calls too. That is also, I think, similar to it being 10x better from me saying it versus hearing it on Gong. Watching it on Gong versus actually being engaged, be introduced on the call as whoever, and ask a couple questions, and you're going to take that feedback so much more to heart, and be more empathetic to that use case to make sure you're translating that feedback directly to the R&D team.
Yeah, and then also to flip that question around, which is something that is also very common, where you start just building whatever sales are saying. Like, that's the flip side, the other side of that, where it almost becomes like a consultancy company where you just build random stuff and no repetition whatsoever. You're just solving customer needs and customizing to everyone.
You need that balance. You need that clear product vision, because it's not going to happen immediately. Building software, one of my biggest lessons from moving from sales to building a tech company has been the time it takes to get that feedback or to have that insight of the feature to build or the problem that you're trying to solve, to then designing it in the right way and getting feedback before you actually write any lines of code for it. And then how do you think about the architecture of it? And then how do you ship it out? And do you ship it to everyone, or some customers first, and get that and build the right stuff? It takes a long time. So you really need someone who's leading product, who's going to take that long-term approach to be like, yes, I'm hearing the pain points and all that kind of stuff. If we're not completely adjusting what our path was 3-6 months ago, I think that this, we'll stick to this, or we'll add it on and we'll prioritize based on this, or we'll move something up and trade off something. But you can't just flip-flop back and forth. You're never going to reach that vision to what it should be or could be. And your customers, even though you're giving feedback and you should be listening to them and adjusting to the market, they're never going to understand what's in your head or that unique insight that you're working towards. So you definitely need a product leader and someone who's very, very senior, who's going to be able to hold that line when you could be potentially closing some larger deals based on adjusting the software.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It's a question of like the long-term vision and the product leadership in the company, where like if you have that future reference frame, that shining star, that the guidance of your company, it's much easier to know, or at least have some reference frames if that's completely a specific use case, and ask for a customer if that's completely out of the scope or not.
Totally. And that actually aligns really well with what we were talking about a second ago with like, where does sales fit in? And, why is it, frowned upon? I think an amazing opportunity early on for startups is having that go-to-market leader, whether it's a sales-focused person or marketing-focused person, to help clarify the ideal customer profiles and the messaging and positioning, because that makes the decisions around what we're talking about right now, the feedback from sales. Hey, does it fit into this model? Because if it doesn't, then it kind of sees, and then they have product and engineering and design has a partner for sticking to that vision. And it makes those decisions so much easier. It's like, hey, we were talking about collaboration, and this is like a pure internal workflow thing that they're asking for. Does that align with our vision and what we're trying to work towards? And then if it's a collaborative thing, oh yeah, we're going to build this anyway. It's super aligned with our messaging and positioning. It's going to connect. It's going to be great, demoable thing, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we can build it even though it's outside of our roadmap because it fits into the broader vision and what we're communicating from a positioning and messaging perspective, what we're pitching from the use cases for sales, and kind of that whole process, instead of just, feature-based, heads down, not thinking about how it fits into the big picture there.
Yeah. Well, let's zoom out for a second. What are your like the general recommendations that you have for sales reps, and let's keep it to founding sales, or like the perspective of being a very small team.
Early on. Being an early on sales rep. It's a tough job because you have to sales reps typically, it's a hard job regardless. You're getting said no to a ton of time. There's a lot of pressure for sales folks, especially if it's compensation based on variable comp. But it's even harder early on because you don't have that roadmap to follow of other previously successful reps in terms of what meetings to have, what personas to talk to, how to run, what is the playbook to generate leads, convert leads to opportunities, sell them, onboard them successfully. You're constantly both changing how you're executing it, like the specific words you're saying, the agendas, the follow-ups, all that kind of stuff, the collateral you're building, figuring out what the process should be in the first place. So you're kind of doing two things at once, right? You're figuring out the process and you're trying to do it at a level that's going to excite your first 10, 20, 50 customers and them taking a big bet. So I think it's really challenging. I would say a best practice is similar to the product side and MVP, and iterating on like one thing at a time. Focus in each month or sprint or quarter on one thing you're going to fix and get right or improve. So for example, if you're finding that one of the challenging parts are, having enough conversations, focus on that. You're not going to be able to do that and build the best demo, build the best sales deck and best onboarding process. Try to break it up into chunks of things that you can both figure out the process and the execution, because you're never going to be able to do everything at once. And I even find that, we set these goals of like, we're going to iterate in this, and then we're going to build out this deck thing, and then this one pager. It's like, break it down, work on one thing at a time, get that right, move on to the next one, then revisit that 6 months ago. And you're like, holy shit, this was terrible, because you've learned a lot since then. So I think that would be a good best practice for early, either founders or sales reps or sales leaders. Just try to break it down, make it easy for yourself.
Yeah, it's good advice. When do you know when to ask for the deal? Like at some point in a business conversation, you need to ask for the wallet, right?
Yeah.
What's the any thoughts on that?
Yeah, have it part of your process. Don't leave it up to like, oh, it's going to feel right on this one or it didn't feel right last time. Set the expectation from the first conversation of what the process is to evaluate, validate, purchase and onboard your product. Say, this is the best. Okay. This first conversation, set the agenda, great to meet. Thanks for reaching out, the intro, whatever, how you got connected. Goal of this meeting, understand where you're at with, for us it'd be, your sales maturity and building out a repeatable process and collaborating with your customers. Would love to understand where you're at with the team and growth goals and blah, blah, blah. Love to share. I know you're probably interested in seeing what the actual thing is. We'll go through that. And then, either upfront then or at the end, saving 5 minutes to share, hey, if this was interesting, if you wanted to bring in other people that were part of the decision, this is what it would look like. We'd do a deep dive. We'd go through, other questions that come up. And then we do either paid pilot or, whatever, we do an annual contract. And this is this is how we'd recommend validating it in the meantime, or other meetings or conversations to have. And when you get to that point, it's already the expectation set. You can get a yes or no. It's not about, okay, like where are we at and how are they feeling and how are we feeling about it? It should be some sort of process, especially if you're not closing, $100,000 plus K deals to start. If you're closing, 5, 20, 40K deals, there should be some sort of process where you're going to get that yes or no pretty early on. Yeah.
Yeah. What about like that? That leads me to another question regarding the balance between, because everyone wants to scale sales, right? That's the holy grail of sales.
Yeah.
But when do you know when it's time to, like, in the beginning you want to do things that doesn't scale at all, of course, like figuring out what makes sense and
Totally.
how what excites the customer and how you solve their problems, right? But when like the balance between self-serve and manual onboarding, like demos or physical meetings and checklists of onboardings and analysis and migrations and all that stuff, like when do you know when to do self-serve versus manual onboarding?
Well, I guess there's two questions there. One is more for like more of like a pure product-led growth company where like you're doing free or trials or whatever like that. Let's say for this example, it's more of a sales-led type thing, and you want to figure out, when you scale sales, when you start hiring more people to close deals or drive leads. I think people think that that's when you can repeatedly drive your ideal customer to your platform and close them and get the money. It's not. It's when you can consistently get them to value for the reason that they bought your product. And I think a lot of people confuse it with when you can consistently sell or drive lead. It's not either of those things. It's for the reason that they reached out, for the reason that they bought your thing. Are they going to adopt and either grow or stay on as a happy customer? And I think for a lot of products that can take months or quarters to figure out, really. I think people start working on scaling too soon, and then you have to solve two problems with a bigger company, which makes it exponentially harder. Now you have to figure out how you're going to retain. Maybe the reason that they were buying and reaching out were actually different than the value that you're bringing, or you're close to that. Like, to solve that problem on top of everything else is really, really, really challenging. And it's also hard to slow down and to say, oh, we're actually not going to step on the pedal because we can generate leads and because we can sell customers. It's kind of where we're at, is like, well, it's going to take quarters to figure out, how happy are people really? How are we going to grow organically and spend the time similar to what you did up front to be able to generate those leads and sell them? And that, I think, is why you see a lot of, these huge Series A rounds where you can get to $1 million plus ARR and not grow like you'd imagine you would, because you haven't really, really nailed the whole kind of product value life cycle. And I think a lot of people are switching to taking that more thoughtful approach now after seeing some companies, kind of burn out a lot earlier. Yeah.
You want to mention some other mistakes in terms of what you've seen when it comes to sales early on?
Yeah, think about sales as like a tack on, like, we have our core business and it's like this, you're saying like very product focused and, engineering focused company. And then we're going to have someone out to sell it. They're external. They're not going to be integrated as you would imagine a product designer or full stack engineer or someone in leadership to the company. And I see that very, very commonly. Same thing with sales versus marketing. Even very early on, you have like one sales lead, one marketing lead, like should be the go-to-market team, because you should be learning together and seeing what's working. And I think it's not living inside and having that kind of voice at the table. Yeah. And then more tactically, like just salespeople, especially early on in their career, just talking about features. We talk about this all the time, and it's so funny because like everyone externally talks about the solution selling and value-based selling and challenger sale, and I love all this stuff and da-da-da. Still, 90% of the conversations that I hear when I talk to sales leaders, people are talking about features and functionality. A lot of the marketing is still about their product, not the value from their customers. And I think that's the most common thing, because it's just human nature to do that. You join this, especially early stage, you join this early stage company, you're really excited about it. It's your baby. It's what you're talking about all day. And you end up switching focus from your customer's problem and adding value there to your thing. And I think that's probably the most common mistake that I see across the board.
Yeah. Do you consult books a lot? Like there's a common way of like everyone's being a sponge when it comes to a specific domain and trying to learn and understand everything. And like you mentioned a lot of good books.
Yeah.
Do you like, if you're an experienced salesperson, you might come from product side, and then you're like, the team is basically like, okay, we need sales. Like everyone is an introvert and like, hey, you like to speak with people, go out, talk.
Yeah.
What's the like the go-to, the top two, the top threes in terms of books or resources, knowledge resources that one should consult in these cases?
Yeah, really good question. That's very often the person that is in charge of sales at an early stage company is the person that seems like enjoys talking to other people, or is just willing to do that, which is kind of funny. But as someone who's read a lot of very sales specific frameworks and methodologies, actually my favorite are less so to do with pure technical sales and actually more just working with people and building partnerships and just being a good person to do business with, and more philosophical things. So how to win friends and influence people is something I talk a lot about. I think you'd be a top 90% sales rep, even if you've never done sales before, if you literally follow most of the things that are in that book. I'd say in terms of more methodology technique book, I would say that the challenger sale, the philosophy in there about how do you provide some sort of unique industry insight. You don't have to be a salesperson. You could be the technical founder and be really passionate about the insight and the thing that you learned and that your product is bringing to the market. That's what other people want to talk to you about. How do you have that shared passion, interest in the problem that they're solving, less so just focused on pitching the thing. So I'd say the challenger sale, how to win friends and influence people, and then kind of just a good perspective on the market and talking to the right people and positioning and messaging and thinking about who your early customers are going to be versus the later people and how you're going to build that momentum and interest in the market is Crossing the Chasm, which is crazy. It was written in like, I think the 70s or 80s. It's like How to Win Friends and Influence People was written in the 30s. So it's classic books. It talks a lot about, and it's always helpful to remind you, especially if you're building something that a lot of people are excited about, but might not be the first users of it, is the difference between the early adopters and the innovators and the rest of the market. There's only going to be a small subset of the potential multi-billion-dollar market that you're building for who are going to be your customers for the first couple of years. It doesn't mean you're building the wrong thing. It doesn't mean they're not your ideal customers eventually and that's your market. It means there's a big difference. I'm personally not an early adopter. I'm not the first X% from a consumer side of products, but you need to find those people. Or you're never going to build that momentum and get off the ground. So I think those some more kind of like broader books that I think, even if you're technically not the best sales rep, are going to be much better suited for you to figure it out than, having the best, specific conversation, because you're going to be helping the company with a lot more than just those conversations and bringing back all those learnings. You need to be a strategic partner in all those different areas. Yeah.
What about podcasts, blogs, newsletters? What else? Any recommendations there?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say um, Modern Sales Pros is a great sales community. If you want to plug into some of the details there, and recommended learnings, founding sales by Pete, who runs Atrium and kind of talks a lot about. I believe is an ex-engineer by trade who's done sales at a couple of early stage companies. So he had to go through this learning, and I think fell in love with not just the art but the science of sales.
Yeah.
Awesome resources there. Talks about like how to build your first sales deck and how to structure a call and like how to hire your first person on the team, even if you're not an expert. So I love that's like super in the details and probably good for more of a, like structured, maybe someone who's not naturally a salesperson to learn from. What else? That's probably, more than enough to start with just that resource.
Yeah. I was wondering, when we discussed during the workshop, we talked a lot about like figuring out which sales channels you should focus on, or like figuring out like there's a bunch of learnings or lessons or how to reach your customers and where are they interacting and how are they interacting and so on. Which channels in terms of like there must be some patterns. Like, have you seen some specific channels that you thought that's been better in terms of reach and engagement than others?
What you just shared, thoughts around the best early channels to figure out to reach your customers. I think there's been a shift in like a lot of bottoms up communities, similar to the one that you run, where it's just focused on a subset of customers. So like there's Slack channels for like, centered around revenue ops or like, SDR team building. Like find the community and find out where those people are hanging out, I think is kind of the core there. Some surprising channels for me, and this is probably because I was selling to, engineers before, is how powerful LinkedIn is for the recruiting market, for the sales market, for marketing, et cetera, or even early stage, founders and just like company building folks in the VC world. Is a lot of people spend a lot of time there, and there's not as much content as you'd imagine. So if you can be providing valuable content there and interesting thoughts and kind of be a participant and contributor to the space, it can drive a lot of organic interest. That's been the biggest surprise to me. Is I'm not usually the person that's on these types of shows or posting. Like I was just never that. I was like, I'm going to go deep with my customers. I'm going to, we're talking to the engineering leaders or product leaders or frontline folks themselves. And that was what I lived for 5 years at Stripe. And it's been very different now, selling to salespeople and sales leaders and CEOs. And that's
how was that? How was that transition?
Like anything, a new set of learnings and way to approach it. But I really enjoy it. I think one of the best things about selling to sales people or leaders or people on the revenue side is they're a lot more straightforward. Like you're probably not going to waste a lot of time trying to sell a sales leader or rep, because they're going to be super honest. They understand the value of time in business. So it's like, hey, one person or another, like, this is not the right time, check back X amount of months. And they'll even talk to us. It's hilarious. It'll be like, hey, so I'm your champion, but this person's the decision maker. This person's the signer.
Helping you with the
it's like we're doing like a deal plan meeting with like the terminology, and it's hilarious. But it's it's just very real, right? Like they're going to invest their time in things that make sense for them. So I think it's a good fun space to sell into, and it feels like you're talking to people that really get it. Yeah.
Sometimes the best buyers are people who are actually good sellers.
Yes.
It's like no time wasting. Just what are you trying to do? What are you solving? What's the solution? I think it's really interesting to see, but it also sort of shines the light on the different ways of approaching sales as well. Because depending on, like, obviously there are ways to analyze who are you meeting, and depending on the personality of that buyer or potential customer, you need to adapt. Like, is this someone who wants to detail oriented? Is someone who wants to, like, bam, fast solutions, give me the summary, and then we go from there? Like, how do you navigate that? Like, that's a skill set in itself, like a science almost.
Totally. Around both your market in general, like our market is much more, hey, give me the information, I'll go figure it out, whatever. But also, yeah, each person you might, especially if you're dealing with more of like, I feel like more of a sales ops enablement type person, they're more strategic, want to step back, etc. But there's a challenge with also, I think, fast people, fast decisions. You might not get through your whole process. So how do you balance wanting to make progress and get to the next meeting and momentum with needing to go through some of those details and disqualify some of the deals if they're excited about it? So yeah, it's definitely, I think that is one of the things that comes with time and experience. It isn't necessarily one of those innate things that only a very small percentage of salespeople, even people that have been in the career for 10, 15, 20 years, can do really well, is adjust to who the person they're talking to is and how they like to buy and approach conversations. Because for certain, slower buyers, you need to speed it up elegantly. You need to loop in other stakeholders proactively around their back, like figure out how to way to do that effectively, because they're going to take the time and slowly want to do everything themselves. The other people, they want to rush through, be able to buy the thing and jump to onboarding and not be successful because you haven't aligned on success criteria. Other people don't know what's going on internally because they're not good at that. So yeah, I think that's one of the tougher arts to sales.
Yeah. And that brings me to another question regarding like onboarding and customer. Like you're obviously validating your customer just like they're validating your product or solution.
Yeah.
When do you know it's early stage, you're not profitable? When do you know when to say no to a customer, when you feel like, okay, this is not going to be good? Like we could probably close it, but it's not going to be a great relationship. Like, could you comment on that?
Yeah, I think being from the first conversation very upfront with like, this is the type of company we help that have this problem, that trying to do this. I think if you're aligned there and they're saying yes to it and you still have a gut that they aren't going to do it, I think being pragmatic about how you're spending your resources, I don't think that customers failing with you, especially if you're early stage, is that bad of a thing, because you probably should learn some pretty insightful things about what's not lining up based on what you're putting out there to drive interest, how you're selling them, and then the value that they don't get or would want to get, I think is really, really interesting. Then you have to decide, hey, are we going to spend like, X% of this person's time on this deal versus, how are you going to balance those things? I think is how I would approach it. Early on, I wouldn't recommend saying no to a lot of customers or any customer if they're at least aligned with you on problem that they're having and how you're approaching the solution, because you're going to learn a lot from that. But yeah, if you're having to change how you're proposing something and they're getting excited about something else, like, yeah, you're just setting yourself up for failure, and you're not going to learn anything from that, because like, going into it that the value prop that they're excited and the change that they're looking for and impact isn't aligned with how you're thinking about building your product or messaging that value. So
yeah, it's really counterintuitive to like not continue or close a deal if it's like the whole idea is to win customers, right? And think about like, okay, what are the consequences of this? Because I've seen this a couple of times where companies are like stretching themselves too much to just because they're really, really excited to just getting paid, but then completely offsets the scope of what they're supposed to do, or the sort of the hypothesis.
Yeah, well, it's hard because you work so long to build the team and the product and go to market, and when you find people that are excited about it in any way, like you're like, yes, you get it, and you get the vision, and you want to do this stuff with us. But you're right, like if it takes you completely off in a different direction from what the vision is, a lot of times it's probably not worth it. But yeah, it's easy to say, oh, this is clearly our ideal customers and the value we're trying to bring, and this is not your ideal customer or the value they're trying to get out of it, and because you've spent so much time trying to get to that point. So yeah, I think it's very hard when you're in that situation to say no. And yeah, as long as you're thinking about the resource, like as long as you're not like changing your platform to put them in it, or using a ton of resources, I don't think it's necessarily the worst thing in the world if you're going to get those learnings. But yeah, just being, really diligent about your company spending your time.
Makes sense. We're going to wrap this up really soon. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on Like running a business is extremely tough. Building a company is extremely tough. Being a sales representative on a company, an early stage company, is also extremely tough, right? It's like a yeah, it's crazy. And as you mentioned in the workshops, like you only see the exciting news on the blogs and the websites, but what's going on behind the scenes is that everyone is fighting really hard to survive and to be successful. My question to you: how do you stay motivated, and do you have any like life hacks or things you do in order to stay focused?
Yeah, great question. It is not all sunshine and rainbows. It is very tough to go from zero an idea. In most cases, you're going to get a lot of no's. It's going to be hard to get people to, share a vision very early on. The first hires, all that kind of stuff. Sales is really challenging, even if you're doing all the right things. It's very different than coming into a company and being successful when you have even a bit of momentum behind you, even if it is, 15, 10, 20 people. It's going to be very different than getting that train going down the track to start. How to stay motivated. I think if you're going to be part of that really early team, you're either going to have to be incredibly passionate about the problem that you're working on and the people that you're talking to. You're going to have some inherent energy giving motivation from that. Or I don't even think it needs to be on the topic. And this is, I think, a controversial opinion. People are all about the mission of the company, driven, et cetera. I don't necessarily think that needs to be the case. I think you could be really excited about creating something and being part of building something very early on and going from zero to something and being part of that small team and loving the interactions that you have with that group of people and seeing the impact that you can have and doing the hard things. I think that almost is more important. And in most cases, why people do that. And I think there's this weird, similar to like, oh, we're killing it, like every company's doing amazing. A similar dynamic of, oh, I'm really into the problem or the solution or something. It could be like you just love to build things, and it's a crazy mental strategic challenge to be contributing and building the company or the product or the sales motion or something, and want that challenge. And actually, I would argue that that's probably the majority of people that are successful at joining early stage companies. Like I joined Stripe after joining Columbia Records. My passion was music and developing artists and all that kind of stuff. I enjoyed 10 times more selling payments infrastructure to engineers versus working in the music industry because of the challenge that I had, the people I was working with, all of those things, not just the mission of the company. So I think that's something that should be celebrated a bit more and is what leads to, I think, the motivation of those early stage teams.
Yeah. What was your best learnings that you brought with you from Stripe to Accord?
Best learnings I brought from Stripe. That's a great question. There's so many, but I'm trying to think of the ones that like underscored how I think about.
Did you let me reformulate from working with, because you worked with customers. Did you only work with artists, or did you like work on business deals as well on Columbia Records?
A mix of a bunch of things.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to see in terms of like, the way you approach. I remember like my first sales jobs, I was almost like a vacuum cleaner seller, like kicking in doors and like trying to close things. And then over years, I've been through a lot of different type of environment in which the later years, it's been more consultative, partnership driven sales. Have you gone through like that type of sales journey yourself? Or like what's the key learnings from Stripe on that?
Yeah. So I guess to answer each of those questions, the first one I thought about it, I think it was the importance of collaboration and shared learning. Like there was so much transparency at Stripe that you could have information and context on what's happening across different departments and organizations, and just having a pulse on Stripe to help customers. And like I felt like I really had the pulse of Stripe and the market from just being able to consume everything, open conversations on Slack, the company-wide meetings, all those things. I felt really plugged in. It was super motivating. And I felt like I was an owner and I could work with a lot of people across a lot of teams. And like that was so different than what I've heard from other people with sales experience or even just other early stage companies. And they were doing this at like a pretty big scale, like it starts to break down and like you have your big orgs and like then it just makes sense to kind of make that more insular. But that was one of the really big takeaways in terms of how to build the company and the product, is to try to hire smart people that are going to take ownership over those things and make those decisions and not have it kind of like very top down. And how to balance that, I think, is really challenging and something I'm still working on, but I think is the key to success and moving fast and the right way to build startups or any company or any team. That was probably the big takeaway, is how they built out the company to hire first smart generalists and then experts in their fields to all collaborate and have all that shared context, and something that we strive for a lot at Accord, that I think brings on the right people that are going to want to be part of that company building. So that we call like radical transparency and collaboration.
Awesome. I feel the same way. That if I think about one thing that I want to bring into my company, it's definitely the internal transparency and the sharing of notes and like being so aligned with the values and the vision. That makes perfect sense. Ross, really appreciate your time tuning in all the way from Canada early in the morning. Do you want to like, how can what's the way to reach you or Accord?
Yeah, the best way to reach me would just be LinkedIn, Ross Rich Accord. I'll come up. Shoot me an email at ross@inaccord.com, INACCORD.com. If you want to learn more, maybe not chat directly, we have a blog on our site, so website inaccord.com, and a newsletter called From Vendorship to Partnership. Our mission is all about bringing B2B sales from vendorship to partnership, and feel free to subscribe there and check out some of the thoughts that we've written down on our blog.
For sure. Definitely look that up. Ross, have a great day now. Thanks so much.
Yeah, great to chat.
Talk soon.
I'll enjoy this conversation, and have a great day or evening.
For sure. Best of luck with the business now.
Appreciate it.
Go for it.
All right.
Bye.